Hey guys, my name is Emma and today I'm going to be talking to you about the top 8 books that I did not finish or DNF'd in 2018. Now, I wasn't too sure if I wanted to film this one or not because it's a little bit of a downer. They're all books that I didn't enjoy for whatever reason and that's why I didn't finish them. But actually, books that you don't finish rarely get talked about on Booktube because they don't get included in monthly wrap-ups or anything like that. And I think that they're valid in their own right because I think sometimes we have a tendency to try and struggle through books even if we're not enjoying them, and I'm trying to become more comfortable in myself to DNF books even if I have got quite far through them. The first one that I DNF'd was The Devil Wears Prada by Lauren Weisenberger. This one I had on audiobook and I listened to about an hour's worth of the audiobook before deciding I didn't want to continue. Now, The Devil Wears Prada is a fairly famous story because of the amazing movie with Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt and Meryl Streep, who we adore. Oh, and Stanley Tucci, who is like one of the greatest actors of our time. But book fell completely flat for me. The movie had clearly taken this book and turned everybody's dials up to 11, and this just going back to the book felt like a pale imitation of what I wanted. Andy, the main character, was flat and weak and just like wet and kept making excuses for her boss. Miranda wasn't anywhere near the cutthroat woman that she is in the movie, and it just felt generally really half-hearted and lacked the spark that I was really looking for that you get in the movie. So I decided I wasn't going to waste any more time with it. Another one that I didn't finish was We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. Now, I started this for Banned Bookathon. This is the origin of the two great dystopian novels, 1984 by Orwell and Brave New World by Huxley. And whilst I think it's very important to go back and see where some of these seminal books get their ideas from, and finding the origins of these things is always really interesting, there's a reason why We is not the famous one and why the other two are. Right, if you took the lack of plot from Orwell but with the poor writing style of Brave New World and smashed them together, that's what you'd get from this book. I just didn't care about it at all. The writing felt very clunky. It was just really hard work to get into the flow of things. The world building wasn't anywhere near as strong, and it just felt like because I was reading 1984 and Brave New World literally around the same time, I did it all in Banned Bookathon for Banned Books Week. It just felt like, why am I bothering with this book when I can read the two things that come from it, which are so much better? So that's what I did. I ditched it. I do hasten to add I got a good 75% of the way through this, but I think at least 40% of that was skim reading unbelievable amounts. So I realised that I wasn't actually taking anything in, and therefore it was a waste of time to even pretend. Then we have Girlfriend in a Coma by Douglas Coupland. So this was a gift from a book subscription service that offers bespoke books. It's called the Willoughby Book Club, and I'll link it down below. And generally a lot of the books that they sent me were really good, but this was way off the mark. It was supposed to be some kind of dystopian fiction where a woman falls into a coma and then when she wakes back up everything's gone to shit, but I couldn't get past about 3 pages. This is one of the few books on here that I didn't dedicate a serious amount of time to, and I think it's because of the time period that it was written in. So this was from kind of the mid to late 90s, when just culturally speaking a lot of things were very different, and some stuff which was considered kind of cool back then really has lost its interest now. So the first 3 or 4 pages referenced taking drugs at least 12 times, and they were it was this whole conversation in a house party comparing different kinds of ecstasy, and most of it was dialogue and every other word seemed to be in italics, and it felt very forced. It felt very Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, very Fight Clubby, very of its time, and there's nothing wrong with that style of book, and if you really like it, that's totally fair enough. But for me personally, it just reminded me of being a teenager hanging out at a house party with a bunch of guys comparing like what weed pairs best with what cider, and it's just not a culture that I have positive memories of or I want to get involved in again, and I really didn't need a book to rehash that. And I found this such a barrier to entry to get to the bit that I was interested in that there was no way I was going to stick with this, because I didn't really care about the girlfriend who was about to fall into a coma. As far as I was concerned, she was really irritating. She could fall into that coma. That would be fine. So this one very, very early on. Now we're going to go for one that has been hugely popular this year, and I really don't get the hype. And that's The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, not The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Very confusing time for 2 books to come out. This is by Stuart Turton and it's a thriller with a bit of a sci-fi twist, where a gentleman wakes up in a different body every day, reliving the same day at this dinner party in kind of, think very Agatha Christie kind of time, and has to basically solve who murders Evelyn Hardcastle and hopefully save her life. So I dedicated a hell of a lot of time to this. I got at least 60% of the way through, if not more. The characterization just wasn't strong enough for me to care, which seems to be a recurring theme here. So the main character, we don't actually really get to know his name, I don't think, but he's thrown into these different bodies, which then means that he kind of takes on different elements of their personality, and then he's very focused on trying to save Evelyn, but he's also really focused on saving this other woman who is also swapping bodies, I think. And basically there was so much chopping and changing of who everybody was that I didn't feel like I could connect to any of them. And I didn't really know why we gave a crap about saving either Evelyn's life, or I think her name was Mira, the other one. Her life either. There was somebody pulling the strings and I didn't really care why. I also didn't care about him because I didn't know who he was. I couldn't separate out the narrator from the various characters that he was wearing each day. It felt rushed, it felt sloppy, it felt confusing, and ultimately by the time I got about 60% of the way through, we'd met most of the characters and there was no emotional connection with any of them, so I decided to leave this one alone. I did briefly start Geek Love by Catherine Dunn and then decided to leave this one by the wayside. This is, well, what I thought it was going in was going to be a story about freaks and circuses, which for those of you who don't know, I used to work in the circus industry. I have toured with the circus before. The blurb and then how the book started was so far removed from each other that it felt almost like they were two completely separate books. And the style was very clunky and very forced, and there was a lot of focus on the grotesqueness of the freaks, and I just kind of got a feeling that it was maybe gonna go down a road that I wasn't really up for at that point in time. This is one of the few on the list that I haven't completely ruled out coming back to at some point in the future, because I think given the right mood I could be really into this sort of slightly absurdist style, but it reminded me a lot of Knights of the Circus by Angela Carter, which I hate as a book. It is infuriating and awful and I really don't like it, and there were just so many stylistic things within the first few pages that reminded me so much of that book that I thought, let's just kind of cut and run now, because I'm not in the mood for a book that I don't actually enjoy right now. But I might have been uncharitable to Catherine Dunn, and I've heard really good things about this, so this is one of the very few on this list that I may come back to at some point in the future. Then we have Woman on the Edge of Time by Marge Percy, not too sure. This one popped up as a recommended because I've been reading Margaret Atwood and The Power by Naomi Alderman, and it's supposed to be a feminist, well I say supposed to be, it really is kind of a feminist text as such. So this was written, I think, in the 70s, and it tells the story of a woman who, like, half of the book is spent with her being in an insane asylum and half of the book is spent with her like astral projecting to the future, to this utopian world where she has a connection with one of the people in the future. I got that far into it. My book was, it's very much a product of its time, and I think that we have moved beyond that discourse in both directions. The sections in the insane asylum were deeply uncomfortable to read, and her very, very deep-rooted denial of what was happening with the astral plane got very, very frustrating. And then when she was astral projecting to this kind of future utopia, the concept of what was a utopia felt very like we've moved beyond those concepts of what it means to be inclusive and accepting. It feels a little bit like, you know, when you have somebody who's just like, oh, I just don't see race, I just don't really see colour in people, and you go, no, that's missing the point of the discourse here, because the point is not to be in a position where we don't see race at all. The point is to be in a position where we can acknowledge differences without them becoming discriminatory. And in the same way that, so it gets really fluid with gender, but not in a way that is actually beneficial, just in a way that's like, well, if we just wipe out all these labels, then everyone will get along. And that, whilst probably fairly progressive and relevant in the 70s, just feels false now, I guess. Part of me was very tempted to try and power through with it, because you've got to respect where it sits in kind of the canon of literary history and what has come before it and what has come after it, and things like that, books like this, then you wouldn't have things like Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, and without that you wouldn't have things like The Power by Naomi Alderman. And you know, literature cannot be examined entirely independent to one another. Like, books are not just separate entities, they sit in a timeline of themselves. So I respect it for what it has done, but I don't want to read it. Another one I really struggled with was Edna O'Brien's The Little Red Chairs. This was supposed to be my read for Ireland for my Book World tour, and I was so psyched about it, but I'm really fussy about points of view in a book, and this one just has a feature that does my head in when it's in literature. It had a completely different point of view for every single chapter, and it also didn't tell us whose point of view we were in. Maybe I just have a really short attention span when it comes to books and literature, but if you don't grab me in the first few pages and make me care, like make me really have an emotional connection to your characters, I'm not on board. And one thing that really breaks that up is having lots of different multiple points of view, because every time we jump into a new person's head, I've got a whole new human being that I've got to like learn all their quirks for. Ugh. So in that respect, I'm not going to be bothered to try and connect and try and work out who everybody is. Like, this shouldn't, the thriller aspect of this shouldn't be who the fuck are we talking about now? I get really annoyed about points of view. That was a little bit of a rant. I'm sure that there are people out there who don't mind points of view and will think that this is a wonderful book, but I really couldn't get past that. Another one I really struggled with was Tulip Fever by Deborah McGuck. I think I'm pronouncing that right. That's a great name. I'm assuming Scottish. So this is a historical fiction set in the Netherlands, I think, which was where the whole industry around tulips and tulip breeding was a really big thing, and it was an entire kind of time period of history where everybody was obsessed with growing tulips, and entire livelihoods and industries, like, it was a common way to make your wealth. So I thought walking into this that this was going to be a historical fiction with a hell of a lot of information about a time period and an industry that I know nothing about. And we all know by now on this channel, I'm a massive nerd who loves learning new things from books, especially random things like different time periods, and I want to know about these tulips. How did they grow? How were they shipped? Who wanted to buy them? What was going on? How much money were we talking? What do you mean Netherlands was funded on tulips? I think it was the Netherlands, I can't remember right now. But turns out that this book is actually more of a romance and a bodice ripper at that, and that's not what I signed up for. I'm sorry, they have their place in literature. At times they can be good fun. I have no problem with a good bit of smut, but that's not what it said on the label. I was expecting far more historical fiction, and the speed of which the heroine seemed determined to run off with this painter rather than her husband. Like, we were barely 3 or 4 pages in before she was getting all flustered by his gaze. And I don't know you, I don't know him, I don't know anyone yet. Like, can we introduce people first and kind of let everyone get settled, and so let me know your motivations, your intentions, your outlook, your fundamental principles that make you you, before we get worried about the fact that you're feeling all damp in your nether regions. Maybe I want more from my smut than what most smut is. So yeah, so I abandoned this because if I'm gonna read smut, I want to know that I'm walking into smut rather than stumbling upon it accidentally, and I want my smut to have layers and nuances. If I wanted cheap smut that didn't have a nuance to it, then I'd go watch porn. Do you DNF books? Do you like the idea of DNFing? I'm trying to get more comfortable with DNFing things. Have a wonderful reading night, I guess, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye guys.